Hi, everyone. Before we begin episode 420, a quick warning. This episode contains discussions of depression, suicide, and the depiction of traumatic events, including deaths of loved ones. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to episode 420 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and listeners, maybe you heard a content warning before this episode because we are going to be discussing some sensitive topics and believe such a warning was warranted. But before we talk about these sensitive topics, which are pertaining to the indie RPG Omori, let's introduce the rest of the panel, starting with Jimmy Turner.
Hello.
And Hilary Andreff.
Hello.
And Audra Bowling.
Hello.
Audra, Hilary, Jimmy. Over the past few weeks to a month, we've all been playing Omori, a indie RPG from fairly recent. I think it was completed for itch.io in around 6 years ago, and then had console releases in 2020, and then I think a year or two later for the Switch. So it's recent-ish, but very retro styled, and if someone seeing a still from this game could easily mistake it for like a late era NES or early to mid Super Nintendo RPG, but then are some visual choices that go well beyond those. And we'll get to those as we talk to them, or maybe we won't, because there's a lot to discuss here. I finished the game earlier today, so my thoughts are as fresh as they possibly could be. But starting with you, I guess Audra. What's your overall impression now that you've finished the game? What is your 1 or 2 sentence reaction?
Wow.
Okay, that's very loaded.
Yes.
You know what? I'll go first to set you guys up a little bit. I knew what I was getting into in this game, and I have to admit I was very impressed by the mechanics and the visual choices and the dark places it went. But even then, I found it a little stressful to play at times. Like I sort of just knew what was coming around the corner, and that made it harder to play for me. Which is why I had to. We sort of delayed this episode by a little bit. I needed more time to play because it was very slow going for me. Even though my total play time was something like 18 or 20 hours. But also I don't do well with psychological or horror games. I think it took me an entire month to play. To play Until Dawn a couple years ago, and that game is only like 10 hours. So I found this game a little hard to. I struggled with this game, but not for a difficulty reason, but because I sort of knew what was coming. But I really think this is an excellent RPG that just isn't really to my taste most of the time. But also I avoid like very, very tense experiences of this nature when I play video games. So, Audra, the same question to you. Like, what was your overall feeling about this game after you finished?
I think mine was very similar to yours. I truly appreciate a lot of the aspects of the game. It was much more intense than I usually tend to like, and I did have to actually take some breaks from it just to kind of calm myself down a little bit. But I was really impressed with just the overall storytelling and the mechanics, and yeah, some of the choices that they do for like designs and final dungeon elements and battle elements are just really great.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the end game a lot. I promised this ahead of time. But Jimmy, same question. What was your overall feeling after playing this game for the first time? And as a side note, you also played this with one or more of your kids sort of looking over your shoulder. Is that right?
Yep. So actually, I think that helped because she had already beaten the game prior. So times where I might have wanted to take a break, she would kind of take over for a little bit and kind of get through a lot of the the more menial battle parts. But yeah, my opinion was similar to your guys's. I actually, heard so much about the game's story and where it goes that I kind of hadn't even considered how much I would enjoy the battle mechanics. That's kind of what surprised me the most, and I found really enjoyable.
Yeah, I thought the mechanics were really really good. How do I put this? Like, I wish the dungeons weren't quite as long, or but that was mostly for time and focus reasons, and not for content reasons. I thought the game's boss battles were really really good for the most part, especially a couple towards the end. But before we go on any of those tangents, Hilary, same question to you. This was also your first time playing the game, I think. Correct
Yep.
me if I'm wrong. But what was your overall feeling and reaction after finishing it?
My overall reaction, so it's not going to deviate too much from what everyone is saying. I knew what I was getting into, um, but was definitely struck by how successfully I was feeling the story and like how drawn in I was. So definitely an intense experience. Also had to take some breaks, but like from a narrative design perspective, it was really really impressive how they use the gameplay and the characterization and all these different elements to really kind of make you feel a little bit of what everyone was going through, which was, yeah, pretty tense. And then I struggled internally a little bit because it was coupled with like such a fun gameplay experience and even kind of like a cute, quirky experience sometimes in Headspace. But then if I stopped to think about that for more than a minute, I would go, oh, wait, no, but that's not good, right? I'm getting too drawn into Headspace. Uh, so definitely an engrossing experience, I think is what I would call it.
Yeah, and we all of us have mentioned this in some way or another, but I really think expectations are important with this game, because if you're expecting it to just be a classic styled retro RPG, you're gonna be you might even think some of the content is in poor taste or not what you wanted. Which I'm again, I don't want to make it overgeneralize audience feelings here, but there are so many sensitive issues depicted in Omori, including but not limited to mental health, depression, anxiety, self harm, bullying, ostracizing, like childhood trauma. Like I think that people going into this game should like realize this is not HBO's Game of Thrones RPG. This is like HBO's Euphoria RPG. There's like it's there are depictions of uncomfortable subject matter, and if the wrong person plays it without the expectation of that going in, there could be there could be a triggering or worse. But I mean, thankfully that didn't happen to any of us. But I mean, I know we did harp on it a little bit in the previous episode, but this game goes some dark places, and I think they handle it in a very smart way. And but I think it's important that players know about that darkness before they get in.
Yeah, and I mean, this episode is where we're really going to talk about all of it in the full context of the game.
Yes, because I think all of those topics are like absolutely at their strongest in the final act of the game, and we, for very sensible reasons, did not talk about the final act of the game in the part one episode. But let's just jump into this. In the previous episode, we talked quite a bit about the battle mechanics and the sort of headspace versus real world dichotomy, but mostly stayed in headspace. Let's jump into the real world, because after you do that first dungeon, or a couple dungeons maybe, like the junkyard sequence in headspace, Sunny wakes up. In fact, I think this other than that one like midnight snack scene at the beginning, this is like you have to sort of get used to calling him Sunny and not Omori, because his avatar in Headspace is called Omori. Sunny wakes up to some knocks on the door. It's his old friend Kel. He doesn't quite look the same as he does in Headspace, because this is 4 years later, I think, or maybe 3 years later. So these characters are in the 15 to 18 age range instead of the 11 to 15 age range, or maybe 11 to 14 age range. And so your buddy Kel encourages you to leave the house because you're leaving. You're moving 3 days to a new city, and you try to use your last 3 days in I think it's called Faraway Town to just hang out with your friends one last time. But also, what you're really doing with these last 3 days is coming to terms with your grief and trauma to what happened to your sister a few years ago before you shut yourself off from the world. And your friends here are the same friends that you meet in Headspace. There's Kel, Aubrey, Hero, and Basil. And I think I'm going to say Basil instead of Basil now. I'm a little bit separated from the Vincent Price character in The Great Mouse Detective. Well, no, I should say the main character of the Great Mouse Detective. But the important thing here is that they're not really the same. Like, they're all of these characters are very different in the 3 years later. Basil is almost as shut away as Sunny is. He's clearly a ball of anxiety. Has a lot of he's relentlessly bullied. He's clearly suffering. And has not seen Sunny in many years, who he considered his best friend at some point. And the leader of those bullies is none other than Aubrey, your friend, who is now a pink-haired delinquent girl who beats up kids with baseball bats, which is, a stark change. Kel is not quite as much of a like troublemaker as he was, but he's like a little bit of a slacker, but very good natured, and seems to be the one that is really trying to reconnect with Sunny the most directly. Hero doesn't really appear in this part of the game yet. This is the 3 days to go real world section.
He's off at college, correct?
Yeah, he's off from college. Yeah, he's off at university, and he's coming back the next day, so you don't see him right away. Do we ever get his real name either? Because at some point, Kel tells you that his nickname is Hero because he loves sub sandwiches so much.
Right.
No, I actually looked into that, and it never gives his real name, but apparently some people on the internet did some digging, and his name was Henry in some of the game files.
Fascinating.
So they think that might be his actual name, but it's not confirmed. So
I love it. No. I absolutely trust the word of these Reddit detectives for a game like this, because that's exactly the kind of work I am unwilling to do, but know someone else is. So yeah, Henry / Hero does not show up in this segment. But what were our reactions to this? For me, the big swing was Aubrey, because she, if anything, she is one of like she's a little bit feisty, but to see her really go from in your main character party to a villain in the real world arcs it was a shock to me. It just made me sad how much these children had drifted apart and how she changed. But what was anyone else's reaction to the early segments in Real World?
I think I had a similar reaction. I was actually very upset at first when I saw Aubrey in particular.
Yeah.
Because it's such a contrast.
And fighting her was extremely difficult. And it kind of didn't click that I still had my knife with me. So I may have stabbed her, and I got a little thing where she basically just, what is wrong with you?
No, I think that
made it worse.
Yeah, that scene's incredible, because when you're fighting in Headspace, you're like, oh yeah, sure, Omori's weapon is a knife. That's normal. I'm thinking with RPG brain. But but Sunny is so disconnected from reality. He's been living he has not left his house in 3 or 4 years. He's just carrying around a knife. He gets into a fight, he's going to use his knife. But then all the other teenagers around are like, what the hell? He pulled a knife. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And Sunny's reaction isn't like isn't horror and or apologies. He's like, I'm oh, I shouldn't hold the knife. Like it's the I mean Sunny always has a very detached stoic attitude for the entire game, whether it's Sunny in the real world or Omori in the game, but
Thank you,
that was
Kel.
that was a moment. It's like, oh my
Yep.
god, he pulled a knife.
Right.
That
Thank
made
you, thank you, Kel, for taking it away.
Yes.
yeah, but that sort of like does create a disconnect. Oh, this is the real world and Headspace are different,
Right.
and is acknowledging that difference in game. I was impressed.
Yeah, that was well constructed.
I hadn't even thought. Oh yeah, I'm holding a knife. Like until that moment happened.
Yep.
I was like, oh yeah, my guy's a knife guy. So he's got a knife. So it turns out being a knife guy is not acceptable in modern society.
Yeah, don't actually, take a knife to the park.
I also liked in the real world fights that you didn't necessarily have to win.
Yeah.
Like that was
That's
an
true.
interesting touch.
I did beat up Kim and Vance.
Yeah.
I didn't know I actually didn't realize you could lose that one, but Aubrey absolutely whooped my ass.
Oh yeah, no chance.
I managed to beat Aubrey, although I think I went back. I don't think I did the first time, but then I had to come back.
Probably need to get some med kits from the pharmacy to do that.
Oh yeah, I had Band-Aids all over the place.
But Jimmy, did you notice anything, or did anything jump out at you in the early goings on in the real world segment?
I just thought it was interesting that you could see, although all the characters in the real world were very different from how they were in Headspace, you could kind of see why maybe Omori would perceive the way he does their personalities in Headspace. So that I just kind of like the parallels between the two worlds, even though they're vastly different. But making those connections, I really enjoyed kind of finding. I actually, enjoyed digging deeper and finding like the little connections, the things you learn about them, both in Headspace and the real world. I just thought that was really well done. The kind of back and forth.
Yeah, like Charlie, the big kid in the real world, is sort of a slow-witted monster in the park in Faraway Forest in Headspace. Like there's a mostly a one-to-one analog with the main children characters in the game, but they're not exactly the same.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe other than your main party.
Yeah, it just really gives a great opportunity to develop all of the main party into well-realized characters.
And we're going to put a pin in this for now because there's more real world to discuss later. I want to get into the second big Headspace portion of the game. Right now, there isn't a lot of thrust to the story in Headspace, other than this is Sunny's dream world or internal world that is separate from the real world, and he's clearly using it to process his feelings and memories from when he was out and about and before he became a shut-in. But otherwise, like, this is an adventure that isn't exactly related to any real world events, because because really all you know about what your quest goal is in Headspace is, oh, Basil's missing, we need to find him, and that is important later. But right now, all that means is you're exploring new areas that are locked away by your fears.
Oh my gosh. But before we move on really quickly, when we talk about kind of the finale of the real world day at Basil's house, because that was a moment where I really kind of felt a sting from the game.
I'm trying to remember that exactly. With
the shadow.
Yeah. So Basil doesn't know that Sunny's moving.
Right. And also Basil's grandmother is very, very sick and may be dying soon. There's even a live-in nurse that takes care of them.
Yeah. And so what happens is Basil learns this news at dinner Unfortunately, Kelp doesn't know that Basil doesn't know and starts talking about it. Basil asks to be excused. You find him in the bathroom, if I'm not mistaken, and it's not exactly a jump scare, but it's like one of the introductions of some kind of creepy, like, horror elements. There's like this awful, creepy monster behind Basil, and Basil says, "Oh, something's behind you too. I know you can see it. Help me." And Basil's asking for help, and the only thing you can do is leave.
Yeah.
Which was so hard for me.
I don't think that's the first time you see like monster horror elements in the game.
Mm-mm.
You do that in the first time you enter Headspace. So and we were even talked about in the previous episode.
Yeah, but the in way relation to another person.
Yes, but seeing it in the real world and making it very clear that Basil is suffering in a similar way that Sunny is suffering is new to us. But yeah, we had seen that at least in part already. But the fact that you can see it in the real world and it's happening to someone else is a shock. Yes. But going back into Headspace, basically you have an open-ended quest. We need to find Basil, and because I think you have an encounter with a spider in the real world that goes okay, to Sunny, that is. Now Omori is no longer cripplingly afraid of spiders, so you're able to gain the ability to clear away spider webs, and it lets you explore a section of the map that was blocked away by spider webs. And that leads you to a sort of a mini forest dungeon called, I think, the Pyrefield Forest or the Pyrewood Forest.
Firefly, I think.
Pyrefly, that's it. Pyrefly Forest. There is a lot of spider bug puzzles. There's a whole optional segment of it that's a sort of a north, south, east, west mystery, like Lost Woods style puzzle.
Gives you some good backstory on the function of Headspace.
Yeah, I went and did part of it, but then I knew that I had had a time limit on when I could finish the game, and so I didn't get that far in it. But after the Pyrefly Forest, you go through, you meet the sprout, you find the Sprout Mole City, and Sprout Moles are sort of regular enemies in this game. And they're hosting a concert soon for Sweetheart, princess / pop star / celebrity ? In this world, and her castle is right next to the Sprout Mole village, and she exploits the Sprout Moles very, very oppressively, but is also hosting an ongoing reality show to find her perfect man, and it's a lot going on at once. It's sort of like 2 mini dungeons in a row, or 1 mini dungeon and 1 very large dungeon that is that goes some really wacky places. And I think this segment was heavily inspired by Alice in Wonderland, because you have this misty forest with a centipede instead of a caterpillar at the end, and then you have a Queen of Hearts style villain who's a sort of a haughty royalty exploiting her underlings. So what were our feelings on this part of the game, the forest and then the giant pink castle?
I'm gonna have nightmares about the cat spiders. I don't know what it was about them, but they just made me so sad.
I thought the castle part was interesting. I mean, especially the dungeon thing where you found out that she was just throwing everybody into the dungeon.
Right.
Yeah, she threatens people with imprisonment all the time, and the dungeon is mostly like exactly that. Like, everyone's in the dungeon, from responsible citizens to people that annoy her to outsiders like you.
Yeah, very Queen of Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A little bit arbitrary. You could end up in the dungeon no matter what you do. It just depends. And that's kind of reflected with like the Sprout Mole audience at the game show, which I don't know how much time you all spent talking to them, but it was the weirdest and kind of an interesting mix of like a lot of them just being like, "Yay, Sweetheart's the best. She can do no wrong," but then like the other front row Sprout Moles are selling increasingly more valuable things for their seats, and then there's one in the back. If you try to talk to it, it just says it is not alive. So one of the sprout moles there is just dead, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, I did not see that part.
It just... I'm only mentioning it because it's kind of like it encapsulated like the feel of this section a lot to me. Just the kind of randomness of it.
The sprout moles are so peculiar to me because, like, again, they're very low level enemies. Like you might compare them to a Dragon Quest slime or something.
Yeah.
But then you find the civilization of them, and they're so quirky and funny. Like, they're obsessed with tofu. They worship Sweetheart, even though she is absolutely horrible to them. But they have these very peculiar senses of duty. If you explore their village, like you'll find people. You'll find them taking certain jobs very seriously, and again, it's a tofu driven economy that I found very funny. But they're so they're so clearly suffering under Sweetheart, but also love her in a way that just makes you feel sort of bad for them. But I wonder if it's a if they're trying to satirize celebrity worship, or if or something like that, or if they're just trying to be funny and give us this game's equivalent of the Mr. Saturns. Because again, there's a lot of surface comparisons to Earthbound you can make in this game.
I was definitely drawing some Saturn Village.
Yeah, I'm not saying this game. I'm not saying Omori rips off Earthbound. It does not. But there's plenty of homage, and the sprout moles are kind of like Mr. Saturns.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it does homage well, as in like you get the references, but it still serves the purpose of Omori itself. It's like,
but the dungeon itself, after you after you get a front row seat to the reality show, Sweetheart briefly falls in love with the character Hero, but he's not interested. It gets you thrown in the dungeon. Then you have a fairly lengthy dungeon, which is sort of the dungeon and the surrounding castle, where you have to do some upstairs, downstairs, figuring out of which doors to unlock and which staircases to use to get out of the dungeon itself. Then once you're in the castle, you have to sort of do 4 mini quests before a crowd clears off at the beginning, and you can sort of go into the last phase of the dungeon itself. And I say dungeon as in RPG dungeon, not the castle dungeon, because that's a whole different bag of fish. But the way you interact with the moles in these other mini games just makes them even funnier. Like you have to direct a chorus of moles getting ready for the wedding march by throwing tomatoes at them, because when moles sing, they accidentally sing themselves to sleep, and you have to like try to figure out how to bake a cake using someone's terrible instructions. Like putting in eggs and sugar instead of ping pong balls and salt. and it's sort of like mini games and puzzles that just sort of add to the absurdity and the comedy that again I think adds a little bit of Alice in Wonderland vibe to the whole proceedings. But I mean, I was pretty entertained by it. But when I found out that after you do those 4 things and fight 3 mini bosses and clear out of the main castle hall, now you have to solve a new puzzle in the castle garden. It's like, oh my god! I wish that this dungeon and one other later dungeon as well had been like 20% shorter.
yeah.
But because they're just very long and involved, and my dungeon stamina had run out at some point. But it's a cool design, and it's pretty consistently entertaining front to back.
Yeah, and I think visually it's really nicely done too. But I think the garden is definitely where I hit my limit too.
Yeah.
After the castle portion, I was ready to fight a boss and move on. But it's like, oh no, now here's a garden portion, and I have to solve like one other large environmental puzzle. It's like, oh great, thanks.
Yeah, this was the one part of the game that I kind of felt the drag, I would say. And then kind of the payoff after the dungeon, and then it kind of all feels like a waste of time because, Captain Spaceboy comes back, she leaves with him, and that's pretty much it. It's like, oh, we did all this for that? Okay, whatever.
Yeah, and I hope you had a good sadness build going, because when you fight Sweetheart in the boss fight before Captain Spaceboy, who amusingly gets gets his name changed to Space Husband after he says I do. After that boss fight, or I should say during that boss fight, she has a bunch of like happiness status powers. So you need to be good at being sad to unless you want to struggle a lot in that boss fight, which was kind of the case for me because I had been enraging Aubrey and using headbutt for like
Oh yeah.
every major encounter
Oh,
until
yeah.
then. It's like, oh no, the like maximum happiness sweetheart will annihilate her. So I had to just make everyone extra sad to win that boss fight.
Yeah, I think I
Which
had
again
to
just
repeat
goes
that.
into which goes into the how interesting this game is mechanically. The happy, sad, angry mechanics I think are fun the whole game.
Hmm.
And Audra, you said this one took you a couple tries?
Yeah, I had to repeat the sweetheart boss fight quite a bit.
I didn't have to repeat any story bosses, but there's a couple just random optional hard fights I would run into that would just completely wipe me out. And so like this game's difficulty curve is I don't think it's ever unfair, but this is a moderately challenging RPG.
Yep.
It's you can't just coast through the whole game. You have to understand the mechanics, and you might accidentally be underleveled for a thing here or there. So
Yeah.
so you can't avoid every fight in the field is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
One of the first one of those is the bear in Firefly Forest, right?
For me, it was the kite guy in the
right. Yep.
right near the beginning of the game. But the bear in the forest will mess you up too. You have on that one. I think it's because he's automatically enraged. You have to use happiness to beat up the bear. There's a giant like vine or like carnivorous plant dinosaur at the root level of the sprout mole village that completely wiped me out when I found it. I never even went back to figure out what it was guarding because again I was in a time crunch to finish this game, but yeah, there's the enemies can be tough in this game, and there's at least 2 other tough boss fights I want to talk about before we end today. But do we have any other feelings about what's going on in this sort of middle section of Headspace?
I was debating whether to talk about cake recipes and how I tried to make it correct and didn't because I put my dry ingredients together and my wet ingredients together and that was wrong. So I killed the first sous chef.
Oh, I did too. That was. Yeah,
I think I got it right the first time, but mostly because I was like, man, you can't cook a cake at 75 degrees. What are you talking about? But the I did notice that there were like 5 sous chefs there, so I just figured that after the fact I realized, oh, okay, they'll just replace them if you get it wrong because they don't really give you much in the way of fail states in this game. Like I don't think I did very well in the chorus mini game, but they just let me go anyway afterwards. Anyway, this game has a lot of weird choices when it goes outside the gameplay theater of random battles. But we'll talk about that later because the resort and the highway and inside the whale definitely have some unusual gameplay choices. But moving on, after you finish the stuff with Sweetheart and Space Boy, I think you have a final opportunity to do optional stuff in this area if you want. But then after that, you are able to go back to real world and move the story forward with reconnecting with your friends. And I mean, it sort of continues from where we left off. There's more confrontations between you and Aubrey and her gang. I think this is where you learn that Aubrey's been visiting church regularly, which is not something she did in the past, and she's definitely struggling with Mari's death, just like all of you were, but maybe not quite as. But she's been grieving in her own way, other than Sonny's shutting himself off, and Basil becoming a ball of anxiety. And this part of the game adds some depth to Aubrey's character because it's like. I mean, I think everyone can realize, okay, she is acting out because of her grief, but it made it much, much clearer that she was suffering in a similar way to the other characters in this part of the game.
I think it specifically states that, like, she, found new friends and acted out specifically because her other friends all reacted in ways where they weren't exactly there for her, is sort of the implication, right around when the tragic events happened, which is interesting. I also think I haven't 100% verified this, but I think her hair color change actually is something she did to honor Mari, because
Yes,
they
they
had a
were
plan
talking
to
about
dye their hair bright colors.
Yeah,
Yep.
they mentioned this very, very late in the game, but Mari and Aubrey have a conversation where Mari's like, "Someday I want to dye my hair purple," and Aubrey says, "My favorite color is pink. Maybe I can dye my hair pink." But that happens sometime after Mari's passing.
Yep.
But it just makes it very, very clear that everyone is sort of suffering and reacting in their own way here. And Kel, even though Kel's a little bit like, I just want to be friends, although my head's kind of empty here. He and Mari are clashing as teenagers in a sort of more intense way than they were as children, because Kel does not approve of the gang that she's hanging out with,
No.
and especially the bullying of poor Basil. And the sort of the climax of this section of the story is you learn that that Aubrey's gang is hanging out at their old hidden spot behind the park, and you've run into the gang beating up Basil. You lose a fight to them, or at least I lost a fight to the 6 versus 2 fight. But after they clear out, Aubrey shoves Basil into the pond. Omori dives. I'm sorry. Sunny dives after him, even though Sunny has a fear of the water. And they're eventually rescued by Hero, who, like an actual hero, steps in at the last moment. He's just returned from college, and saves the day. And and I think basically, I'm trying to remember this, because this did have a lot's happened between now and then. Aubrey runs off. You hang out with Hero and Kel and Basil a little bit. Basil goes back home, but then you reminisce with Kel and Hero a little bit. Eventually get Basil's photo book back from Aubrey, and then you decide to have a sleepover at Sunny's house. And I might be having those slightly out of order, but basically, Hero's back from college. He saves you and Basil from drowning, and then you have a sleepover together. And because of this drowning event, now when the next time you go into Headspace, Omori's no longer afraid of drowning, so you can do this sort of underwater section for the next section of Headspace. But do we have any other thoughts about this part of the real world story before we move on to, oh boy, a part of the game I really liked, followed by a part of the game I really didn't?
I thought when you get the photo album back, I really like the mentioning of how some of the photos are still missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they reveal later on that it was actually partially because it was from Aubrey and her grief.
She stole every photo that had Mari in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I did notice that how Mari's mentioned in the comments, but isn't in any of the pictures. I think I assumed at the time that that Basil himself had removed the pictures with Mari, but it looks like it was Aubrey.
Yeah.
And then that gets complicated later. But yeah, no, it's smart details where they're hinting how much Mari meant to all of them without explicitly saying what she was like, or what happened to her. That's revealed sort of, I would say, in a medium burn, not a total slow burn, but they do a good job of pacing out the details on this part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they leave the little breadcrumb trail for you to keep wanting to find out more throughout the whole thing.
Oh yes, you have to have foreshadowing, and you have to have clues to be a good mystery or a good thriller. And they're doing their job here. But before we get any more closure on that, we have to do a pretty RPG heavy part of this RPG.
Yes.
The next Headspace section you're separated from your friends because I think the very last moment of the day 2 headspace is jumping into a pit that you believe Basil might be hiding behind, and upon landing, Omori wakes alone, and Mari guides him to a an underwater section. So you have to sort of swim across this bay or a body of water, and you find yourself at I think it's called is it called the underwater highway?
Yes,
Yeah,
underwater highway.
yeah, the underwater highway, which is a long highway with tolls and everything. But at the far west end of the highway, I'm sorry, the far east end of the highway is a hotel called the Last Resort, where all three of your friends have been like unfairly press ganged into working, and and sort of one by one you have to find your friends and convince them that, or at least in the case of Aubrey and Hero, convince them that it's what's happening to them is unfair, and they're basically working like slaves, and you have to sort of just solve the puzzles around the light puzzles around this hotel to get an audience with the CEO, Mr. Jossum, who is a shark. And fans of the 1990s Street Sharks cartoon know exactly what this is referencing.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah. My favorite was the orca named Jet. I always thought that was a cool guy. That was a cool action figure. He's not one of the original 3 Street Sharks though. And anyway, okay, this is not a 90s cartoon or action figure podcast. But the crazy part here is I think this part of the game is a very, very blatant satirization of sort of the modern workplace, or possibly even modern capitalism, or at least the American sort of corporate dynamic, because like Hero specifically is extremely productive. Jossum is always praising him, but he also works for nothing. And Jossum is trying to convince him. It's like, no, you're not working for money, but you won't live out your full potential unless you're here. And it basically it's sort of comparing wage slavery to actual slavery in and how and even down to how the crocodile guards on the casino floor will attack you on sight, but if you meet them in their locker room, they'll be like, "Hey, we're off the clock. We don't have to do a damn thing."
Right.
Like there's a lot of like sort of making fun of making fun of corporate America, and even like even people on vacation. There's just a lot of jokes in this part of the game.
Yeah, the alligators really really got me. It reminded me a lot of you remember the old Looney Tunes with Wile E. Coyote and the sheepdog, where they would both clock in together, and then throughout the cartoon, Wile E. Coyote would try to steal the sheep, and the sheepdog would basically beat him up, and then they'd clock out at the end of the day, and they'd be best friends again. That's kind of like what it reminded me of.
I mean, the comment that Jossum made about like a contract is a promise. You can't just walk away from it, because then I can't not pay you anything. Like those kind of comments just and really was a sort of a like, you know, like a sort of anti-work. If you like, it was an anti-work comment in a good way, at least to me. But also I've had the same office job, or at least the same office environment for, oh boy, 12 years now. Oh no, do I need maybe I need to walk away. But yeah, like this anti-capitalist part of the game ends with 2 boss fights, one with Mr. Jossum and his endless supply of summoned alligator guards, which were getting really annoying. 7 or 8 alligators in, let me tell you.
Yes.
And then right after that, they mercifully heal you back to full before you fight his employee of the month. My favorite character from the part 1 of the game, Pluto the Rogue Planet. But when he comes in, you're like, oh no, you work for him too. Was my first thought. And my second thought
Yeah.
was as like the environment disintegrated around us, and he turned to giant size, and like, oh, this is making fun of like RPG final bosses.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like turning into a giant version of yourself, having like a cosmic background, and the floor melting away. It felt appropriately epic, and was I'm not positive about this because I do like one boss fight later, but maybe my favorite boss fight in the game because it just felt appropriately high stakes and was a good balance of challenge, and you could approach it using the emotion system however you wanted, and it was just I don't know, it was I thought it was a good boss fight, although I did feel a moment of betrayal having to fight my favorite guy from the first quarter of the game.
Yeah.
And I think he does like basically this isn't even my final form.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, he even said that and was about to transform into another final form, but then Mr. Jossum's like, enough. We're going to let him win. I don't want you to destroy the office anymore. And then you get to continue and explore the rest of the undersea highway to look for Basil.
Thank you, Mr. Jossum. That's
yeah.
one good thing he did for us.
Yeah, he cares too much about real estate to allow so much property destruction that he can't write off as a business expense. But that was only really the first part of this segment because you have to go through a pretty lengthy section of the underwater highway to find out the next place you're going to. And there's a bunch of side caves, a bunch of side content. There's even a mini boss where you can trade in all of your clams for clems, and which is probably making fun of cryptocurrency. And you have to sort of defeat the scammer to get your money back. It's and I want to take this tangent to go into this a little bit. There is so much side content in this game. It is a little overwhelming. Like in the Firefly Forest ages ago, you find a joke book that you can find filled with puns that you find throughout the game, and then report back to the Weeping Willow, who's like a sad like Zelda lake fairy who wants to find who wants to hear some jokes. There's also a little imp or somebody named Demi who wants to find, who's read too many books and needs you to go to the world's libraries to find more interesting books. And it's by the end of the game, I didn't finish all of them, not even close, but I had probably dozens of side quests in my little menu that Mari can give you if you talk to her. That it was a frankly shocking number compared to what I expected out of this game.
I know. Every time I went to save, I was like, "Please don't look at me, Mari. I know I have a long list."
Yeah, and I mean, there's even like stuff you can do in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah, there's at least 3 people that are begging for money that might change the world state if you give them enough by a certain amount of time. There's a lady, I should say a teenage girl who collects seashells that might have a thing for Kel. Not sure, but they seem to have a nice friendly relationship going on there. There's just a lot of optional stuff in this game, and I couldn't see the ending of a little bit of it much. Like I wasn't sure how far or how necessary these side hustles were, but there's a lot of them, and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And at least you'll get a decent weapon or accessory out of them a lot of the time.
Right. And it seems like there's kind of a range. Like some of them are more relevant or at least like more on the main path than others. Random question. Did anybody find Kel's pet rock? Because I did not, and I'm curious about it.
I did not.
I did notice that the pet rock was named Hector, just like his real dog, but I did not find the pet rock.
I did not find it either.
Sorry, Kel.
It's very amusing to me because my aunt's dog is named Hector, so I was not expecting that. And I was just playing with Hector like last weekend, but yeah, it's there's just so much going on here. I definitely didn't fill that joke book. I did find the 3 crows that were missing their scarecrow friend. You have to go back to the otherworld part from Act 1 sometime during Act 2 or 3 to get to that one. There's the optional bosses against the boy and his kite, and those bears guarding treasure chests. There's the scam. I think it's pretty easy to miss the Clem scammer unless you seek him out outside the last resort. Right. There's just a lot in this game.
And I want to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and there was even that part of the Firefly Forest that I found and then abandoned because I was worried it would take too long. There's so much extra content in this game.
And now I want to look up just how much cryptocurrency had taken off in 2020 when this was made.
Oh, well, I mean, Bitcoins have been around for, for close to a decade now, aren't they? They started in the early 2010s, but didn't
okay.
but didn't take off seriously until much more recently. So cryptocurrency was at least around, but it did not become, we didn't have anything like the Terraform Labs or
Right.
the Bitcoin crash of a couple of years ago. No, we didn't have anything like that in 2028. Actually, I think this game wasn't its first release on itch.io 2018.
I think that's right.
Yeah,
Yes,
but I think they did have more content added for the console version, so maybe this wasn't in the original release. I'm not sure. I'm playing it on Switch, but yeah, there's just a remarkable amount of content for this being a small team indie game.
Oh,
But moving on a little bit, at the end of the underwater highway, you meet a whale named Humphrey, and Sweetheart, the boss of the previous section, was trying to look for 3 witches that could make her perfect man. And when you meet Humphrey the whale, he's like, "Oh yeah, that Sweetheart lady just went into my belly, and she's meeting the 3 sisters that live there." And so this dungeon, which is maybe my least favorite dungeon in the game, just because it seemed to go on and on and on, is Humphrey the whale's interior. You have to do these 3 puzzle heavy and combat heavy segments in any order you want, and then do some more fights, and then have 2 medium challenging boss fights at the end. I don't want to go into this in minute detail, but I mean, I was entertained by the puzzles at first, but there were so many of them, and this section took so long, probably longer for me than Sweetheart's Castle. I wish it was a little shorter. I mean, I don't know where my dungeon stamina line is exactly, but it's less than the length of this dungeon, at least in 2024. Did anyone else find this as tiresome by the end as I did, or I don't know, maybe it was your favorite dungeon in the game?
No, I kind of felt the same. By the time they did the chase sequence, I was like,
I'm ready to be done.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the chase against that weird cat monster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right. You can do these in any order. There's like a north, east, and west, and I think that was in the north end. But it almost turns into a like you're playing Resident Evil 2 and running away from the what are they called, the Tyrant X, or like you're playing Metroid Fusion and running away from the evil Samus clone. Because it turns into
Right.
a survival thriller briefly, and it's not clear the best way to proceed. I got munched by that cat monster and thrown to the beginning multiple times.
Yes.
Yep.
I had to heal a lot.
After the first couple, I just stopped healing, and I decided, all right, I'm gonna have one HP until I actually see an enemy that I have to deal with, because otherwise I'm just gonna go straight back to 1 HP again when this cat catches me. But yeah, like again, there's that segment, and the segment where you have to collect the little mini Humphreys riding inner tubes, and 3 pretty big puzzles in the robot section of the whale. 2 of which I sort of figured out without much difficulty, but one of them I had to, took me a bit to get my head wrapped around. I don't know. It just felt like 6 or 7 mini segments cobbled together, and I wish it had been 1 or 2 fewer. But at the end of this, Sweetheart rejects all of the 3 suitors that the scientist sisters give her, and you have to fight them as a boss fight. And I did beat it first try, but it was a struggle. I had to use my my jams for the first time, like my rare jellies that heal everyone, that revive everyone at once in this fight, because they can change they can use attack all moves. They can change everyone's emotional state with a single move. They deal a lot of damage. They change their behaviors at 50% health and 25% health. I thought it was maybe the most edge of your seat boss fight in the game for me, at least until the grand finale. And then right after her, they get eaten by the whale because he's decided he's too hungry and doesn't want them in his stomach anymore. And you have to fight this like 3-tiered boss fight against this whale as it's trying to digest you. And I thought it was a little bit easier than the scientists because he didn't have as many chaotic, unpredictable moves. But it was still kind of like two meaty boss fights in a row. After I had suffered through a dungeon that felt a little too long.
Yep.
Again, the gameplay in this game is good, but sometimes it's just like I was ready for a break by the end of the second boss fight in a row. And they did two boss fights in a row at the end of The Last Resort also. So they just love throwing double boss fights at you. Thanks, Omocat.
I guess that's how Headspace is.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Headspace. The Headspace segments are more like a traditional RPG. Some non-linear navigation, but you basically have to get to the ends of dungeons and fight bosses. While the real world stuff is more like what I expected out of this game, very very narrative driven, balancing sort of humor and seriousness, but the I liked the absurdist Headspace parts of the game, but sometimes I felt like it was like the dungeons were a little too long and the boss fights were a little bit too dense. I wouldn't have minded if they spaced it out more. But I mean, the game is over in 20 hours if you don't do very many side quests. So I don't feel like they waste your time that much. But maybe what I'm saying is don't play the last 3/4 of this game in 3 days like I did. Yeah, like, I wish I didn't have to play this game for a podcast because then I could have paced myself a little better and enjoyed it a little bit more. But I think the RPG stuff got a little bit a little bit just too much of a slog by the end. But again, I'm consistently impressed with it and thought the combat was really fun. I sort of wish there were fewer dungeons and more boss fights. They also make healing items very inexpensive and easy to use, which is very very appreciated.
Yes.
Very much.
I found a weapon that made your juice healing items 50% more effective, and I spammed mango smoothies and watermelon juice like nobody's business at the end of the game. It was I was yeah, I got a lot of mileage out of buying lemonades at the little mailbox dude's vendor. But whatever. After the whale, which goes into some body horror moments because you are being like devoured down the multiple sphincters of this whale's esophagus as a boss fight. So if you don't like mouth sounds or mouth appearances, then this is probably much scarier for you. But by the end of this, for some reason, your team has slowly started to forget why they were down there, and sort of Omori has to remind them that they're here to look for Basil. And this segment ends with you finding a new basically one of the side quests that you've been dealing with since the beginning sort of comes up to a head here because you've been finding keys on a keyboard as a sort of as a collectible on occasion. I actually missed one earlier in the game because I didn't realize you can only see them if Omori's your front character. Otherwise,
I did that once too.
Otherwise they just appear as shadows. So there was one that I missed because I didn't have Omori in front because I was smashing jars with Aubrey or something. But after you defeat Humphrey and move forward a little bit, they show you all of the keyboard keys you've collected, and make it clear that you have to fill out the message at the bottom, which I think you need something like 13 of the 26 letters. Like you don't need all of them, but you need several of them. And they give you 2 of them right after Humphrey. And if you don't have all of the ones to spell out the message, you have to go back and find all of them. But once you find all of them, something happens in faraway woods near Basil's house, and you can continue the story going there. I had to go out of my way to find. I think it was the O key was somewhere over by the Lost Resort, or by the Last Resort. But the basically they make it very clear that this side quest is part of the story and not optional at all. And then you get into some very very scary moments at Basil's house, where you sort of confront his own prison of anxiety and guilt that Sonny himself has been confronting. And it sort of makes it clear that the last act of the game is going to be like saving you and Basil from yourselves. Whew. It's a lot to deal with, but this is also your last chance to do extra stuff in Headspace. So
Yep.
now's the time to beat up those angry bears or explore the Firefly Forest more or what have you.
Unfortunately, you can't do one of the most important and cute side quests that I just wanted to give a shout out to, which is watering Basil's plants.
Oh, yes.
That's right. Yes, I think you can. You get an achievement if you water Basil's plants all 3 days in Headspace. So like the Headspace trip to the junkyard, the Headspace trip to the Sprout Mole Town, and the Headspace trip to the underwater highway. But you get the achievement if you water all of his plants those 3 days. But if you didn't finish watering them on day 1 or day 2, then you can't finish it from now. That's true.
You also get a secret ending. Yes, you do.
You get a secret bit. Yep.
Oh, I think I must have gotten the secret ending then, because I remember checking and I got the badge for doing all of that. Well, we can get into that when we talk about the different endings in the game. There's so many silly side quests you can avoid. I didn't realize that there was a badge or an achievement for brushing your teeth all 3 days. And I forgot to do that either. I forget if it was day 1 or day 2, but it's impossible. It's possible to forget to brush your teeth and then not 100% the game. But again, I think this is probably a 15 to 20 hour game if you just do most of the normal stuff. But if you go for 100% completion, you're probably going to break the 50-hour mark because there's just so much stuff to do. Does anyone want to bring up something in Headspace before we go on to the final act of the story?
I'm good.
Did you guys like?
Yeah, I'm
good. Did you guys like the Scientist Sisters boss fight as much as I did? Because I really almost died when they switched your HP, your heart and juice values.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think I had 1 or 2 characters I think like 3 characters in single digits because I had been spending juice like crazy. And then the next attack wiped out 2, and I had to use my Revive All Jam, and it was I don't know, it was edge of your seat in a good way for me, but I might have been slightly under leveled. I didn't have Hero's Heal All skill.
Yep.
But I learned his Heal All skill after the Humphrey boss fight. So it was like, oh, thanks, this would have been great.
Right.
These last two battles, thanks.
I think I got it shortly before.
Right, I could be off here. I think I fought them at like level 24, 25 when you get that skill at 27 or something. Whatever, but the game does a good job of giving you skills and giving you a lot of tools to play around with, and then a couple of tough boss fights to use them on. I really enjoyed these parts of the game, but the last section throws most of that out of the window because you're confronting exactly what happened to Mari on the day she passed, and why why Sunny and Basil find this like have been suffering so much. Very, very abridged version here. You go back into the real world. You spend the day with Hero and Kel. You eventually confront Aubrey at her house, which seems to have fallen in disrepair since her father either passed away or left, because her mom's like catatonic in front of the TV, and the house is a big mess. But you confront Aubrey. She reveals that she has all of the photos with Mari in them, but except for one that's still missing. And the reason she's been so mean to Basil is because when she tried to reach out and reconnect with him after Mari passed away, she saw his photo book, and all of Mari's face had been blacked out of every photo. So she was furious at him and stole the photo book, and over the years managed to clean off all of the black ink covering Mari's face with, I don't know, maybe she must have used rubbing alcohol or something. But so she really feels like Basil was trying to erase Mari's memory, and we learn later that's not really what happened. So you have a reconciliation with Aubrey. You decide to find Basil together. You do some other stuff around town here or there, and it ends with you deciding to well, okay, things get worse for Basil because his grandmother passes away, and when he returns from the hospital where she passed, he shuts himself up in his room. So Sunny, Hero, Kel, and Aubrey decide to stay for dinner and stay the night. um and also I forgot, they go to your old treehouse and find the last missing photo of Mari, and relive some memories there as well. Uh, but things really come to a head in the middle of the night. Sunny has a nightmare where it all comes out, why him and Basil are acting this way and what really happened 4 years earlier. And it comes out that and this is also very gradual. Like, you don't know this at the beginning of the game. You learn that Sunny and Mari were both musicians, and Sunny played the violin and Mari played the piano, and they were planning to have a recital together. Uh, but then the day of the recital was the day Mari died, and they also reveal pretty not long before this that Mari had taken her own life. This was a that and no one understood why, because by all accounts she was a loving, nurturing teenage girl who had friends she loved and family she loved and a lot to live for. But it comes out during this nightmare sequence where you have to you're chasing around shadows and twisted memories and shades that look vaguely like Basil. You collect photos of like shadowy dark memories of what happened on the day Mari died. And this is located in a place called Black Space, which is located underneath White Space, because I think the allegory is Sunny has been living in White Space these past 4 years, which is just a place of emptiness and comfort, where, again, the diary entries in White Space always said nothing happened today, it was all right, or something like that. And then his explorations into Headspace were him confronting his old memories and going on adventures as a coping mechanism. But then when you unlock all of those keys and slip into Black Space, these are the memories he has been repressing for those 4 years. And in this nightmare sequence at the end of Real World Day 3, he's confronting all of these memories, and they discover what happened on the day. And now that some of this is clear and some of this is sort of inferred. What happened on the day of the recital was that Mari was a very dedicated musician who practiced every day, and Sunny loved playing the violin and loved practicing and loved playing music with Mari, but he had a lot of anxiety he was not ready to perform, and I think they hint the whole game that Sunny is possibly neurodivergent, definitely has anxiety and depression. But it makes sense that even if Sunny was a dedicated musician, like a recital in front of dozens or hundreds of people would be terrifying. So basically, Mari is pressuring Sunny to do this recital they've been practicing for. Sunny has some kind of breakdown or tantrum. He doesn't want to do it anymore. He smashes his violin. Mari tries to grab him or hug him, and in a fit of rage, Sunny pushes her away, and she falls down the stairs to her death. Sunny accidentally killed his sister Mari. And at the bottom of the stairs, like presumably going to their house to visit them, Basil saw the whole thing. So together, Sunny and Basil drag Mari's body out to their large backyard and hung it or hang it on a tree to make it appear that she had taken her own life. And the vaguely eye-shaped shade that has been following around Sunny for a lot of the horror segments of the game is his memory looking back at her with one eye open. It's basically her head framed by her long hair with one eye open is the vaguely Sadako looking shade that you've been seeing the whole game.
And I think for Basil, isn't it Basil's idea to kind of stage the suicide?
I think so. I think it was basically Sunny had gone sort of catatonic, had gone completely into shock, and Basil like was sure it was some kind of accident.
Also, right? Yeah.
Which it was, which it was, but Basil was like determined to that Sonny not suffer for this, and so it sort of Basil did sort of guide him into faking Mari's suicide.
Yeah, I think the implication is that Basil's idea of like the something following them both around is this. It's the something that killed Mari, and the something that maybe blacked out the photos in the photo album.
Yeah, and it's also it also seems that it was probably Sonny that blacked out all the photos, except for the one that he kept at the treehouse, and it was just bad timing that that Basil took the photo album home after Sonny blacked out the photos, and then Aubrey discovered it. So it's extremely clear that both Sonny and Basil blame themselves for Mari's passing and are carrying this guilt and trauma with them over the last 4 years. And even though they've been processing it different ways, they've both been living in prisons of their own suffering this whole time. Again, like Basil has crippling anxiety, while Sonny had depression to the point of being a hikikomori / shut-in for the past 4 years. So there was no communication. These five young people had drifted apart, all processing their grief differently. Hero, who is by far the most well-adjusted of any of these, but he's also the oldest, but he just sort of threw himself into studies and refused to acknowledge it. Although I'm 95% sure that Hero was in love with Mari romantically during these cutscenes, so he definitely suffered as everyone else did. Aubrey suffered by acting out. Kel had to find new friends. Like all of them handled it very differently, but really Basil and Sonny have been are the only ones that knew what really happened to Mari, so it's been that much worse for them. And the final confrontation of the game, which I think can change, and this is how it affects the game's endings.
Mm-hmm.
It can change depending on your actions. When you wake up from your nightmare in the middle of the night at Basil's house, you can choose to go back to sleep or go and look for Basil. And if you go back to sleep, I think what happens, and this is me just checking some articles right before we recorded, if you go back to sleep, you wake up to learn that Basil had jumped out of the window and taken his own life. If you wake up and go and try to stop him, you have this big confrontation with the what again Basil calls the something. He's being swallowed by darkness, and you have to use your calm down and focus and persist commands to to sort of overcome the darkness. And the darkness takes the form of your fears that you had overcome earlier in the game. Like one time at one point it's a giant spider, at one point it's some kind of deep sea monster. And after all of that, I think what happens is basically Sonny is able to hold back Basil, and I think they do fall off the window, but they can cushion each other's fall enough so that they're both injured and neither of them dies. But if you make different decisions at this part of the game, Basil can commit suicide here. Am I right there, or am I getting some details off? Because that's very possible that I'm wrong here.
From what I gathered, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly like how they get their injuries.
And I mean, there's also, it can actually get worse if you picked up a knife earlier in the game from back at your house earlier. I think after you stay there with Kel and Hero, Sonny can take his own life at the end of the events here. But
yes, that is true.
But that you have to go a little bit out of your way to pull that off. But it's
yeah, I think you have to go home and make sure you have the knife and
here's where I'm not sure how watering the plants changes the ending, because after all of this, if you are on the good ending path, you walk down this lonely road that has rain or snow on it, and you see more scenes of you in the past including Mari, and this is sort of the first time you get to see Mari as a character in flashback. and again, like, it's extremely idyllic, and these 5 children are very, very cute, which makes everything that's happened to all of them, or 6
Yeah.
children, so sad. Like, this is the heart-wrenching, tear-jerking part of the game, where you realize what's happened, you see all the good times, against this backdrop of the horrible events that take place later.
And how much they all cared for each other.
Yeah, they were really wonderful childhood friends that were torn apart by this awful event, and because and it was probably made worse by how they were processing their grief, or separately and in unhealthy ways at times. Because I don't want to say, I don't want to say any of them are wrong or anything, because again, these are fictional children, but if they had communicated a little bit better, maybe Aubrey wouldn't have become a delinquent beating up people with a bat. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten to such a dark, dramatic place with Sunny or Basil.
And this is maybe the point at which I get a little judgy and say, hey, families, why there's obviously quite a bit of trauma involved here. Why are these kids not having more help?
I mean, yes, that is definitely true, especially since Sunny's mother is extremely absent in this entire game.
Do your chores. I'm going to leave you voice messages.
Yeah, but also
16, but still.
But also, there are 3 or 4 years that we don't see going on here. So I'm sure Sunny's parents did make an effort for a while, and then I'm not sure if Sunny's father is still alive, because we see photos with a mother and a father, and Mari and Sunny, at some point, but then you never hear mention of Sunny's dad in the present.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and you see that one weird scene where I think someone's cutting down a tree, and he says, "You are not my son," to Omori.
Yeah. Oh, that might have. I wonder then. Maybe this is in text, or maybe it's just implied. Maybe, do you think that his parents separated after Mari's death?
That was kind of my assumption. I can't confirm that or anything, but that's kind of what I got out of it.
The tree that Mari, that her dead body was staged for a hanging on, was cut down, probably by Sunny's dad, maybe Sunny and Kel and Hero's dads. But yeah, that's probably it. I bet they separated after Mari passed away. I don't know if they mentioned that explicitly. I didn't see it if they did, but that makes sense, because we do see a 2-parent household in photos.
Yeah.
But yeah, the final part of the game is, first you see these cutscenes that are just heartbreaking, and then but as you do you pass through these cutscenes, Sunny's broken violin that he finds at a hidden toy box in his house starts repairing itself, and it ends with you at the place where you were supposed to have your recital with Mari. And you play the piano and violin duet, and Sunny is confronted by Omori, his mental image of his childhood self, only rendered in blacks and whites, and holding a knife, and using a new moveset that includes, like, cherishing your memories of your friends, and a little sort of triple strike that I have used quite a bit in this boss fight. You have to fight Omori over and over and over until you can until you're able to persevere, and it's brutal. It's a lot of being patient and calming yourself until you have the opening, and then getting killed when it seems impossible, because after a while that my calming down move stopped healing me. I don't know if that happened, if that's supposed to happen or not, but my self heal stopped working and forced me into a game over state.
Yeah, it forces you there.
That was I thought that the game was betraying me, like I had done something wrong, but you're basically forced into a game over after you think you've killed Omori 3 or 4 times or more, but it ends with you sort of just like seeing this suffering child in front of you, the grown-ups, the teenage Sunny and the younger Omori, basically just just hugging him. Omori drops his knife and fades away, making it extremely clear that, again, I think we've mentioned this before, Omori is a Japanese word that can mean burden, among other things, and is the manifestation of the guilt and trauma and suffering that Sunny's been feeling for these years. But finally letting go of that burden and waking up in the hospital, where I think the implication is that Basil attempted to take his own life, but Sunny stops him, but they both fall, and so they're both injured but not dead. And then Sunny leaves his hospital room, goes into Basil's hospital room, where Aubrey, Kel, and Hero also are. And maybe this is different if you've watered all the plants or not, but the last word he says is, I have something to tell you guys, and then credits. So I believe he's going to tell his friends exactly what happened on that day, is the implication. Is that the enhanced ending with the watering plants, or is there something else that I didn't see?
So no, there's actually an additional scene after that. Where Basil wakes up and Sunny's standing there, and he looks at Sunny, and the eye is behind Sunny, and then it kind of fades, and they both smile at each other.
I don't think I saw that. Yeah. So I must.
So that's all it is. It's kind of an implication that, they can both move on now. They don't have the burden anymore.
Yeah.
I wonder if I was supposed to water the plants before finding all the keys, because for a while that section was blocked off.
Yeah, you do have to backtrack a little bit to.
I probably
didn't
backtrack enough. Is I think must be what happened. Well, okay, so that's not that's definitely a nice addition, but I don't think it's not crucial to understanding the story.
No, it's not. But actually, to back up just a step or two, once you get the game over screen, you can choose to continue or not to continue.
Yep. Right,
and if you choose not to, then Omori essentially takes over, and the only way out is to jump off the balcony of the hospital. So, yeah.
Oh, yikes. Okay, yeah, that is the bad ending, which I mercifully did not get. That would have been, oh boy, that would have been a rough Sunday night. Let me tell you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I feel good with the ending I got, but because I really did mainline this game for the last 2/3 or so, I'm still just overwhelmed at how much is in this game that I didn't experience. And this is, if you watch the credits, I mean, OmoCat is basically involved in every single column, but the total number of people that worked on this game is probably under a dozen. It's, like, this was an indie game made by a small team over something like 6 years. And I mean, I hope it's made good money, because I don't know what the Omori business looks like, but it's such an impressive final product. And the fact that, like, I mean, Jimmy, your kids are in their teens or younger. The fact that this is, getting to multiple generations of gamers, this could be a modern classic, especially in the context of how it treats mental health issues. Because I mean, how many other games do we know that treats these topics as smartly and sensitively as this game? I don't know of any. Maybe that My Mother's Cancer, that indie visual novel, like, but you have to get into hyper specific examples like that to even approach this, and none of them have the complexity and huge breadth of content that Omori has.
Right, and none of them use kind of this combination of like storytelling and gameplay and locations to really get the full experience and the full kind of like slow revelation of what exactly happened and how everyone's processing.
And also, this game has a lot of comedy in it, and has homages to Earthbound and Alice in Wonderland and other stuff that is super clever, and has has satire, and a lot of oh boy, I'm losing track of my own thoughts here, thinking about every single topic that Omori touches, because there are so many of them, and it's so impressive. I wish I didn't play this on a deadline because I struggle with games where I feel stress, which is things like horror games or games that are psychological in nature. That where I find it difficult to have like a long grinding session with one. I wish I had paced myself better playing Omori because at times I felt just too much pressure to finish it, and I didn't have a chance to go back and experience all the side stuff, or even think about the heavier topics as much.
Right.
But I'm just gonna say it. This game is it's gonna be remembered for decades for how it handled these topics, but also how good a game it is on its own.
I agree. Yeah.
Agreed. And the best way to experience it is to go at your pace, seek out all the extra things you want to seek out. You know, if you need a longer stint of time and headspace to do more of that kind of lighter side questy stuff, if that relaxes you, go for it.
I think it probably benefits players a lot to every time they go to a new place, like every time you go back to the real world or back to headspace, to sort of re-explore everything, because there is that level of hidden nooks and crannies in this game. But I barely did any of that because I was under some pressure to finish in time. But I think this is a game that rewards time investment and rewards playing it carefully in a way that I didn't.
Yeah, I did some of the side content, but I could definitely make another full playthrough out of just the stuff that I didn't do yet. So
Yeah, that's kind of my experience with it too. I did some of the side quests, and I definitely did some of the ones in the faraway town, like the jobs and the tutoring and everything.
Yeah.
But
There's
other
also
than that,
there's also a secret ending that where if you just don't answer your door all 3 days, you get a sort of a bad ending, right?
Right,
That,
yeah.
that only takes maybe about 30 minutes of gameplay total, but and none of us did that, of course. But like, there's just a lot of hidden stuff in this game
Yeah.
that I did not fully explore, and I don't know if I would replay this because as much as I liked the mechanics of it, I feel like really the big thing is is sort of Sunny and Basil confronting the truth in that final act. That is the big drama and of this game. And I mean, I don't know if I want to re-experience that because I also don't want to watch the movie like um Precious based on the novel Push by Sapphire again. You know what I mean? Like this game is a stressful play at times, and I don't seek out those experiences. But it's also an excellent game.
Yeah.
So I'm extremely glad I played it, and thank you so much, Jimmy, Audra, and Hilary for playing this with me.
Yeah.
I probably would not have sought this out on my own if it weren't for this podcast because
Same.
again, it was a game I was aware of but not super excited to play. But it is so thought-provoking and so well designed that it is absolutely worth it. And listeners, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you've already played Omori, or maybe you just listened to the podcast and because you don't care about spoilers. Both of those are perfectly valid ways to experience it. But even if you do know exactly what happens, Omori is at least worth trying because it is so interesting and fun and weird.
I concur. And I just want to say real quick that I actually nominated this game for and was voted in for a future podcast, but I would not have done that without the suggestion of my daughter Lacey. So I'm giving Lacey a shout out here.
Nice.
So without her, we might not have been playing this for this retro. So
That's
Lacey.
right. That's right. And listeners might not be aware. I don't just pick every game for a retro encounter. I usually pick 4 or 5 games and have an internal poll that staff votes on to pick the game. But a couple months ago, when we were picking the game for May, it was Jimmy's suggestion to put Omori on the poll, and then and here we are. And I should say that it was Lacey's suggestion to put Omori on the poll. But anyway, thank you to Jimmy, Hilary, Audra, and Lacey, and thank you, listeners, for experiencing this with us. Again, I'm not sure I'm going to replay Omori anytime soon, unless it's to show it to someone else, because it is it's a game that goes some dark places, but it does so in a way that I think is overall very successful. But if you want to talk about a game that has an idea, and whether it successfully executes on that idea is a matter of debate, maybe you'd like to hear what we're talking about next week. Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes was one of the most anticipated RPGs of 2024, especially to fans of classic RPGs like everyone that listens to this podcast, because it's again the last game made by the creator of Suikoden before his unfortunate passing a few months ago. So it's a game that so many people on RPG Fan were interested in talking about. We're doing a dedicated spoiler cast of Eiyuden Chronicle either next week or the week after. We're still sort of scheduling things right now. But also coming in later this month, we're doing 2 episodes on Grandia 2. Grandia 2 was picked by a public poll that we threw around in January. And we finally have the right people available to record that episode this month. So the rest of June are going to be 2 episodes on Grandia 2 and 1 episode on Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. But after those games, we're starting to plan out July. We're doing 1 episode that is on the PlayStation 4. It's going to be a best of PS4 episode that we've already started picking the games for. And let me tell you, there's a couple games I was not expecting to have to talk about on the podcast. So that's going to be really interesting, probably early June. But also later in June, we're doing 2 episodes on Dark Souls. That is correct. The 2011 or 2012 PS3 game that has been subsequently released on PS4 and other consoles. It's sort of it wasn't the first game in the Souls-like genre, but it's maybe the first one that made people started saying the word Souls-like. So it's a hugely influential action RPG that and there are so many podcasts and YouTube videos and such on Souls-likes and their lore and nuances of gameplay that we're not going to approach those levels of depth, but we are going to approach Dark Souls with some trepidation and excitement because I have not played that game before, and I hope I can survive to the end to record about it in July. But listeners, if you want to message us about Dark Souls or Eiyuden Chronicle or Omori or my aunt and uncle's dog Hector, you can always email us retro@rpgfan.com, or also follow RPG Fan on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, always either as RPG Fan or RPG Fancom. We also have a dedicated Discord for RPG Fan, which is easy to find and join. Please interact with RPG Fan any way you choose. RPG Fan also has a shop. If you go to rpgfan.com/shop, you can find 2 links. One of them is to a TeePublic store where you can get merchandise and apparel with the RPG Fan logo on it. And also a second link to Hyperplay RPG, which is a UK-based publisher that published a 300-page volume of one-page RPG Fan reviews, which probably has definitely Audra a bunch of times in it, possibly the other 3 of us as well. If you want to see a lot of truncated RPG Fan reviews in a single very impressive book, you can check out that Hyperplay RPG link. And also, Retro Encounter is only 1/3 of the RPG Fan podcast network. There's also Random Encounter every 2 weeks about randomness and what games we're playing, and Rhythm Encounter every other 2 weeks about RPG music. You can review Random, Retro, or Rhythm Encounter on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or however you listen. Please give us feedback if you are willing to do so, especially if it's 5 stars out of 5. But if you want to give us feedback as individuals and not as a podcast, let's tell the listeners how they can find us, the panelists, starting with you, Hilary.
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is my RPG Fan email, hilary@rpgfan.com.
Now, Jimmy.
Best way to get a hold of me is find me on the RPG Fan Discord under Turner-based Jim.
Excellent. And now, Audra.
AudraB@rpgfan.com.
And listeners, if you want to find me, I am at Evoker for Dogs on RPG Fan's Discord, as well as Instagram and Blue Sky. So yeah, I don't think it's very appropriate to end this episode with a joke, even though Omori is a very funny game. It deals with such serious subject matter that we shouldn't be too flippant about it. So I just want to thank all 3 of you for not making any 420 jokes on episode 420. Thank you, good night, and good luck.